Well, that's because you've trained us over these hundreds and hundreds of calls to pay attention to the last message, not the first one.
Who'd ever thought we'd all become Zoom experts, you know?
I'm starting a side business on that. That's my side gig, how to set up Zoom and all these great backgrounds.
Yeah, I was going to say, Stan, are you in a real place? Looks like a nice place to be.
It's the place we all want to go.
Yeah, every place is a real place, Mr. Secretary.
You're making me very thirsty, Stan.
I understand. I have one that's a distillery with nothing but whiskey barrels behind it too.
Hi, Sonia.
Good morning.
Morning. How's everybody?
Great.
Hey, I missed y'all.
How are you?
We're good.
Awesome.
We're good because we're not going anywhere.
You're right.
We're staying home.
You're right.
Well, good
Secretary
morning.
Dashwa, if you want to check your audio, that's fine.
Looking at the time, realizing it's 10 o'clock. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Andrew Doss, and I'm honored to be serving as the director of the Resilient Louisiana Commission. Welcome to this Friday, July 17th meeting of the Commission. The meeting is called to order. I'd like to thank all the Commission members taking part. I'd also like to welcome members of the public. Public's attention and involvement is crucial to the success of the Commission. The Resilient Louisiana Commission appreciates invaluable input from residents across the state and industry sectors, and we welcome your continued participation and insight. This meeting is available via Zoom, and members of the public are encouraged to provide comments at resilientlouisiana@la.gov. It is also available on a YouTube link right now. The public can sign up for meeting email alerts and access Resilient Louisiana Commission and Task Force meeting schedules, agendas, minutes, audio recordings, reports, and other documents of interest at opportunitylouisiana.com/Resilient Louisiana. At this point, we'll conduct a roll call. First, I'd like to recognize that I do see the following Commission members present: Terry Sterling, Secretary Don Pearson, Secretary Kimberly Lewis Robinson, Dr. Jim Richardson, Scott Henskins, Bill Hogan, Walt Leger, Sonia Perez, Tim Temple. And so now I'll call for a roll from the others. Commissioner Jay Darden, Representative Paula Davis, Senator Ronnie Johns, Lieutenant Governor Nungesser, Michael Lafitte, T. Martin.
Here.
Thank you. Tyron Picard.
Here.
Louis Wren. Okay, I'm going to recognize that he's here. He's texted me that he's here. He's just not able to get through, or might have trouble getting through. Jade Brown Russell, are you on?
Hey, I'm here.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so that gives us 13 members out of our 18, so we have a quorum. We are authorized to meet remotely in accordance with Executive Proclamation JBE 2020-75. Now, if everyone could please mute themselves, I hear some noises, for the remainder of the meeting. Our two co-chairs are Secretary Pearson, Secretary of Louisiana Economic Development, and Terry Sterling, Healthcare Management Advisory Consultant. Would either of you like to make some opening remarks?
Welcome back to the commissioners. We're excited about our meeting today and particularly grateful for the guest that will present specifically. We ask Dr. Brown and Dr. Leviste, as they have wrapped up their reports, to come and brief us on what's happening in the Health Equity Task Force, and certainly excited to understand how we can support Secretary Dashwa and Commissioner Reed as they go forward to help us to continue to guide our recovery, and then also Dr. Phillips and Dr. BU for their great work. So looking forward to a great meeting today. Thank you.
Co-Chair Terry Sterling said it very well. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to yield it back to you, Andrew, to move us through our agenda.
Great. We're going to have a series of updates today from a number of very important people in the state. And the first person I'd like to call on is LWC Secretary Ava Dejoie. Are you on, Secretary Dejoie? Is your audio working? Let's see, not hearing you.
Why don't we just defer to Commissioner Reed and then we'll come back.
That sounds great. Commissioner Kim Hunter-Reid with the Board of Regents and Commission on Higher Education. Are you available?
I am. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you all so much for your leadership and your thoughtful work. I appreciate the opportunity to hit a few highlights of the work that we are continuing to do and advancing as we focus on this broad vision of a resilient Louisiana. First of all, in terms of rapid workforce redevelopment and returning citizens to employment, we're excited that the governor has provided $10 million in governor's education emergency funds from the CARES Act to support our community colleges in doing training, scholarshiping displaced workers or continuing students in training in high demand short-term credentials under 12 weeks of training based on regional needs. And I thank Secretary Pearson for convening the regional economic developers so that we could ask them to identify their top 3 credentials that would lead to employment, given that this COVID world has made our occupational forecast irrelevant at this point. So we had to make sure we had real-time information in the field and that we're accelerating opportunities for individuals who are displaced, who may need to reskill or upskill. So the community colleges, not just the community college system, but SUSLA and LSU Eunice, all of our community colleges are focused on this work. And so we're thankful for the governor for that. We thanked Co-Chair Terry Sterling for making sure that the Federal Reserve Bank, the Atlanta Fed, presented the CLIF tool to us. We were blown away by the power of that tool to help to inform clients around best opportunities and how to think about moving public benefits to help them to a credential of value and what that would look like aligned to their own needs with childcare, transportation, et cetera. So I'm excited to report that we have met additionally with Children and Family Services, LCTCS, the Workforce Investment Council, and the Department of Health with the Federal Reserve Bank. Alex Reuter, I believe was his last name. We are moving forward with the Louisiana specific model. We think that's a potential early win for the RLC, and we should strongly support having Louisiana specific information to help people to navigate, given the number of people we have in poverty in our state, and how do we make sure that we use this moment to help people to advance their own likelihood of support and success in our state. Finally, I will just mention, as you all know, we're very focused on a safe reopening for our K-12 schools, for higher education as well. On last week, we had the opportunity, well, this week, we had the opportunity with the governor to share our safe reopening plans with the Vice President, Betsy DeVos, and their team to talk about how to safely get schools opened and to make sure that we have the safety protocols, the health protocols in place to do so. The governor is supporting that work with emergency funds, $500,000 for professional development for faculty this summer on remote learning to improve what we do, and then $4.5 million for devices as we try to address the digital divide, which I'm sure you have heard about probably from every task force group, how important it is to address that. So we are moving forward with plans. We have multiple scenarios, as you know, tied to the phases of where the state is in reopening. And we are working on with GOSEP to try to do a tabletop exercise in early August to test our plans to make sure that we are ready. We also are trying to pursue some external resources to support some of the recommendations of the Education and Workforce Task Force. So lots to be done, lots of energy around the work. We're really excited to support these efforts. And I thank you for the opportunity to provide some updates and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do any commissioners have any questions and follow up to that very helpful report?
I have one quick question for the commissioner. In reading your report, there was a comment that I guess one Acadiana has now set a regional goal for their certificate in education based on that recommendation from the master plan. Has any other region come together and done that type of work and kind of embraced the report and set a goal?
They have not. So one Acadiana has a 55 by 2025 goal. It was a pre-COVID goal. We would love to see every region in Louisiana adopt an attainment goal, but they are the only ones at this point that have a goal.
Thank you.
Sure.
I had a question on that. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Hey.
So one Acadiana has adopted a goal for their region. Do you envision that regional economic development organizations are the entities that you'd like to see adopt those, or do you envision other types of organizations that may make such decisions? I'm just curious to know where we should be kind of pushing locally.
So pre-COVID, we were planning to have a meeting with all the regional economic developers so one Acadiana could present their 2-year process of bringing business and community leaders, faith leaders, K-12, higher ed, all to the table. And then, of course, the disruption of the economy obviously meant people were very focused on trying to get the economy stood back up. But we were trying to, Walt, have a conversation with regional economic developers so that one Acadiana could share. I think that's the right place to start. But it is a broad tent approach in terms of who's at the table to get the work. But you have to have a regional driver for sure.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, I'll push that conversation locally as well on a call that I have later. And obviously, I think you've got to have something to measure yourself by, and I think the regional EDA make a lot of sense. So whatever I can do is helpful. I appreciate your leadership as usual. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kim, this is Dr. Richardson. And good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. Good morning.
On the different skills you're talking about, trying to get the community colleges to focus on certain skill improvements, what type of time dimension is that? How quickly can it be done? Is it easy for people to move into those skills? Are there going to be jobs available? Do you have numbers about that or not?
So I'm looking through my papers to see if I have the information at the ready. So Dr. Richardson, what we did was Secretary Pearson convened the regional economic developers. We asked them to identify the top 3 credentials that would lead to employment in a COVID-informed environment, if you will, or economy. They have identified those. We asked them to be tied to 3, 4, or 5-star jobs, looking at average salaries and training of 12 weeks or less. And so they've provided examples they've provided their specific list to the community technical college system. And they're working to make sure that we have training in each region aligned to the workforce needs based on what the REDOs have shared with us. They want to do 2 things for sure: make sure that they're reaching out to displaced workers, to make sure they're aware of these opportunities to be scholarshiped into credentials of value that have jobs based on what we've heard from the REDOs. But also to make sure that students who may be already enrolled in community technical college that would want to be perhaps switch their credential or want to know more about what the economy needs right now, that information is available to them as well. So I'm happy to share the list. I'm happy to have System President Sullivan share additional details, but that is the work that's being done to make sure that the credential is of value in this date and time based on what the economy needs right now.
Okay. And the community colleges have all of the ability, the resources to do those, teach those skills.
Yes, my understanding is that they have the ability to do that. I don't know of any where they've had to say, you know, we need to change a curriculum or address those things. If they do, I'm sure they would be willing to do that because, you know, they're nimble and responsive. But they do have the list and they're analyzing that and making sure that they're ready to go.
Okay, thank you, Kim.
You're welcome.
Kim,
Dr. Richardson? Dr.
Yeah.
Richardson? This is Ava. Just to segue on what Dr. Reed was sharing, we also are in the process of surveying all of our employers from our wage records, but also have reached out to various business organizations and the like to actually survey those employers so we can get the direct employer feedback. The occupational forecast, which, as you know, is under the WIC that develops the 3, 4, and 5-star jobs. They will be meeting the last week of July to look at that survey information. We've engaged both Tulane and LSU to help us with that information. We will not have what is typically the gold standard, the BLS information that all states use to look at the jobs outlook and the jobs forecast until November. But we're surveying close to 100,000 employers just to see what their immediate needs are beyond what the regional economic development organizations, and kind of working to put that all together to get a better handle on what might be those both large macro and micro needs from employers. And the OFC will vote on that in the morning, and then it will go to the WIC and then to the governor.
Okay, thank you, Ava.
Kim, this is Sonia. Thank you for your presentation this morning and the information around the funding that the governor is providing through the CARES Act for devices and credential training. Could you tell us what the anticipated plan, the duration of the anticipated plan for use of these funds and the training that's being provided for? What's the timeline going to be? How long are we budgeting for, planning for in this environment?
So these dollars, great to see you, Sonia, Regent Perez. These dollars are one-time dollars. So obviously the training, first of all, the training dollars, the $500,000, those are for all of the public systems to make sure that their faculty have the opportunity to basically improve on the remote learning opportunities that were a necessity, but not perfect, right, in the spring. So those dollars are out, and that training is underway as far as I know. I know the UL system is in their 4th series of their training right now. The dollars for devices, again, are one-time dollars. We hope that the campuses, if they have the ability through CARES Act or minority serving institution dollars to match those up with these dollars, would allow them to provide the devices that they need. As you know, such a huge gap between the students who have devices and do not, at a time when we're basically saying hybrid learning is going to be the way learning happens at K-12 and higher ed. So this is now a necessity, not a luxury for our students. So you're right, these are one-time dollars to try to bridge us. I know that we did do a joint letter with public and private institutions to Congress around broadband and more devices. I know there's conversations, who knows where they will land. But we do need to make sure that these things are addressed and as quickly as possible for our students.
But for how long are you anticipating we'll have to be operating under this environment? What are schools planning for?
So obviously, the duration, right? So we will be making sure this fall we have multiple scenarios. Obviously in the spring, there's a lot of hope and prayer around vaccines and therapies, but as I have said, the learning, and as you know, the learning never stops. We just keep going, but the gap in the learning opportunity is just exacerbated when you are in remote learning and you don't have the ability to address the digital divide. I mean, I'd love to have a crystal ball to say we'll be done in 8 months, 6 months, but we just have to have these scenarios in place for the duration until we learn otherwise.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who has any questions for Commissioner Hunter-Reed?
One question for Kim. Can you share the Federal Reserve Atlanta model with everybody, or is that confidential?
No, it was shared actually, Dr. Richardson, with the RLC, so I think it's recorded from one of your previous meetings. We saw it at a RLC meeting and then raised our hand and said, we want to see it at our task force. And so they came and presented it to us, but both of our meetings are recorded. So I can certainly send you any collateral materials they submitted, as well as the recording, so you can see it in action. It is really a fantastic tool to inform individuals well about the benefits cliff and the earning potential in the short and long term for various credentials.
Okay, I appreciate if you do that, Kim. That'd be great. Thank you.
Happy to.
What would be helpful is that when we've built our model, and I don't know the timing on that, if, depending on our meetings, to then demo it when it's ready or when you're almost ready to launch.
That'd be great. Happy to do it.
Thanks.
And thank you again, Terry, for connecting us. So excited.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner, as well, not only for your presentation, for that beautiful painting behind you, which has just lit up my morning. It made me want to shift my camera because I have a friend's paintings behind me. So anyway, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to call on Secretary Ava Dejoie, it sounds like the audio is working now. Would you like to give an update?
Yes, thank you so much, Chairwoman Sterling and Co-Chair Pearson. I appreciate you and the members giving me the opportunity to present to you all again. Before I get into numbers, today is an unemployment release day, and there's some good news there, and talk a little bit about the UI Trust Fund as well. Just a perfect segue with workforce. We are also working with our federal partners, USDOL, with our disaster dislocated worker grants, an initial grant of $6 million, another $34 million that we've built in a healthcare component, and particularly also a component around subsidized employment that we hope to have approval from USDOL in the next 7 to 10 days that I'm rarely excited about. And I will share that with you all when we have some definites on that. And also working with our local offices. And I think it speaks to what Dr. Reed was sharing with the digital divide. We launched Millennial Tech in the last 30 days of the year. And so far with our higher ed partners, we have about 60 individuals who were not enrolled in higher ed now with computers, hotspots, and they are online taking credential courses that will lead to employment. Those employers are already signed up to give those individuals the opportunity to enter directly into the workforce, which of course is something with everything with USDOL is the second quarter wages after exit that we are always very cognizant of, because that is our immediate benchmark for continuation funding for all of our programs. But there's a lot going on around that, and maybe at a later date we could share a little bit more about that. But as it relates to today's state unemployment release, hot off the presses at 10 o'clock, so that I am not violating any of the requirements and the $250,000 fine that goes along with it. Our rate is at 9.7%. So that is a decrease over the month of 4.5%. Obviously, 9.7 is not where anyone anticipated we'd be at this point. June is typically a month where we begin to see seasonal declines just in education, government, higher ed. So we normally drop down in the month of June a little bit. Our rate goes down. But this 9.7 is a significant increase. I think it's also important to note our increase, the state number, is actually based on a corrected BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics model. The national model is not accounting for the individuals that indicate that they are not working but employed, which estimates say that the national unemployment rate would be closer to 16 or 19% if that were accounted for. After after last month's number was released and we were at 13.3, BLS went back in and then did a very unusual thing. They do benchmarking and revisions. They did a revision to all state numbers. So our number actually went up in the interim, but we did have this significant drop. Things headed in the right direction. However, we have seen just this week and last week an uptick in the number of claimants. We do believe, while we cannot go back and trace new claims to any particular cause, but it may in fact be those that are their severance and the like is expiring, or PPP, are now beginning to file unemployment insurance claims. So there's been a slight uptick there. There's also a quarter change for us. So we do believe, though, that some of the new claimants are actually not new claimants. It has to do with the quarter switch, which is based on UI eligibility. To bring you up to date on where the trust fund is, from March 22nd to July 16th, we've paid out $4.6 billion in benefits. 762 million of that is state unemployment insurance benefits, which brings our state UI trust fund balance down to 408 million, which we've already reached one lower trigger, and anticipate that we have roughly 9 to 10 weeks of money in the trust fund to continue to pay state benefits. But paying state benefits is not an option. All states must pay benefits. We are looking at what options are available to us. Many states have started the process of interest-free borrowing from the federal government. There is, of course, the hope that there will be an infusion from the HEROES Act, the next version of CARES, into state trust funds, and really following all of the measures that are outlined in Title 23 about what the agency must do, the increase in the taxable wage base that employers will pay, as well as the severance tax on the debt. So all of those things, I'm sure you all will be hearing a lot more about them in the next few weeks. We were hoping, as I mentioned the last time we spoke, with some of the reserves from the Main Street program and the local program, that might have been used or dedicated by the legislature to infuse the trust fund. That did not happen. Hopefully, if there is any of that money left, or as I previously mentioned, any of new infusions, that might also be a way to shore up the trust fund, because obviously there is a concern there with employers having to pay more employment taxes. What is that going to do to drive companies to hire or not hire? At the same time, our local offices are working diligently to put people back to work. We are engaged in virtual job fairs on a nearly daily basis. To give you an idea of openings right now on our hire site, we have a little bit over 23,000 job openings. So we are working diligently to send individuals to those job openings via all of the remote platforms that we can use to reach out to individuals. Our local offices, depending on where they are and their particular situation as it relates to the health crisis, are seeing clients in some cases. They are not open to the public in other instances, or they are seeing individuals by appointment only. The other thing you should know is the $600 plus up that is on top of either the state weekly benefit of $247 or the federal PUA pandemic unemployment assistance benefit of $107 for gig workers. The $600 plus up, the last day of payment is July 31st. At this point, we do not know what will happen there. There have been lots of discussions among the national organizations of workforce organizations, state workforce organizations. I may be reaching out to you all. I can tell you unequivocally that certainly the Louisiana Workforce Commission and no state agency is equipped to manage the distribution of unemployment insurance benefits based on previous year's wages. Our systems are just not set up that way. The systems are designed on you were employed, an employer reported wages, the verifications of all of those things, ID, all of the fraud safeguards, how we pay individuals are all within generally third-party contract with third-party contractors, but no state has a system in which to do that. So the thought that that might be one of the things that Congress proposes, while it is certainly, I think, very good in concept, and I understand the concept of it, I do think that it would create, as one of my colleagues said, public mayhem, because individuals would feel as though they were entitled to a benefit, but across the board, state agencies are estimating anywhere from 4 weeks minimum to 8 weeks on a good day to be able to distribute any benefits, should it be based on some sort of previous year's earnings or tax correlation. There have been other talks about reducing the 600 to 300. And we'll just have to wait and see. That's not much time for Congress to act, but we'll be following that very closely next week. Going back to the unemployment numbers, just mining gained 200 jobs over the month, lost 6,700 over the year. Construction had losses over the month and over the year. Manufacturing, 400 over the month, 10,000 over the year. Trade, transportation, and utilities was one of the bright spots, nearly 15,000 jobs over the year. Small losses in information technology. Education gained 6,000 jobs over the month. Professional business services gained 5,500 jobs over the month. And leisure and hospitality gained 32,000 jobs over the month. We largely attribute that to restaurants opening or opening for in restaurant dining, but lost 56,000 jobs over the year. Government also gained 900 jobs over the month, but lost nearly 12,000 jobs over the year, if that gives you all an idea of what's going on in each industry sector. And with that, that's how I could go on about this. I won't share any more of my nerdy statistics with you.
Thank you, Secretary Dejoie. Are there any questions from commissioners?
Yes, Secretary Dejoie, this is Tim Temple. How are you today?
Hey, sir, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Question, you mentioned that the current fund balance is, I think you said 400 or 408 million?
Yes, sir.
Okay, what triggers the next increase for the percentage for employment taxes? And can you go through those, what the whether it's 400, 350, whatever, and what is the likelihood do you see of that happening?
Well, the trust fund, and Dr. Richardson has been an integral part of this for many years. The trust fund triggers are based, of course, on the balance. We were looking at upward triggers when we went before the revenue estimating conference last year, expecting to hit our next trigger of 1.25 billion. The downward trigger that we hit a few weeks ago was the trigger between 750 and 400 million, which then raised the taxable wage base from $7,500 to $8,800. The next downward trigger would be when we get below the 100 million mark. And at that point, there is a solvency tax that goes along with it. So the solvency tax allows for nearly a $200, if you kind of just want to look at it in dollars, impact on each employer. So right now, we're in the 750 to 400 range. A 10% discount has gone away. The taxable wage base has gone up to 8,500. The next thing that will happen, an additional 10% discount goes away, and then the solvency tax will be imposed again. To give you just a practical standpoint, if you had an employer that was at an experience rating of 1.8%, so kind of in the middle in terms of their use of the trust fund, they may have been paying $145 annually on the first 7,700. First trigger, that would go up to 160. Second trigger, 176. And the solvency tax would add another $69 to that. If we are then borrowing, there would be, of course, the money that would have to be paid back, and that would be an additional special assessment.
And what do you anticipate? I mean, with PPP, you know, potential fall off there. I mean, would in your expert opinion, what is the likelihood of the fund balance reaching the 100 million and all of those very scary numbers?
Unless there is an infusion, the trust fund is going to go broke. We estimate 9 to 10 weeks.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions from panelists?
Hey, but those taxes will go up as of next year, right? Is that correct?
Yes, sir. So when we go to the revenue estimating conference, as you know, this money is, of course, for those, Dr. Richardson probably wrote the book on this, I'm sure, or at least definitely contributed chapters. We go before the revenue estimating conference every year annually in September, and that is defined in statute. We confirm what the trust fund balance is that's held in the Treasury. So we present the Treasury statement balance. And then from there, we have worked with Dr. Richardson and LSU and other economists to do projections based on what the current market conditions are. Last year, we talked a lot about what tariffs might impact tariffs might have, what other projects were coming down the pike, what are the number of claimants we had annually, the number of benefits we paid out. So last year it was 103,000 individuals. We paid out $153 million. And from that, we establish what the balance will be for the following September and establish also the rate. So we were very much looking forward to there being an additional wage-based reduction going down to 7,000, which would have made it the lowest wage base in the nation, and also an increase in incumbent worker training funds, which are specifically available for Louisiana businesses to upgrade the skills of their existing workforce and create new jobs. When we went below the 750 mark, IWTP went away. Now we are looking at additional discounts being removed or increases being imposed. Just if you said right now what the balance would be or what a company would do just today, they would, your taxable wage base, instead of paying on the first 7,700, you'd be paying on the first 8,500 of wages, and 2 10% discounts would be removed. So you'd be essentially paying 20% more. And let me pull up that number for you. The difference between the two discounts is not that much. It's about like a $20 difference on an employer with a middle level experience rating, which means they've had some people that use the trust fund, but not a whole lot. So the discounts are not that significant. It is when we get into the solvency tax and the like that we really get into an area that is far more I think, just really frightening than anything certainly that I ever imagined. I mean, we were very excited about what we could do for our existing businesses to help them upgrade their workforce. We never thought we'd be going in the opposite direction.
And then the other thing is, as you're raising those business taxes, you're also reducing the unemployment benefits to the people who are out of work, right?
Yes, sir. So the state weekly benefit will go down to $221. We're at $247 now. That will make us have the lowest weekly benefit amount in the nation. Another negative of that is that the state's maximum weekly benefit amount for us right now, 247, is the benchmark that establishes what an individual can make before they're not eligible to receive any other unemployment benefits. So, for example, if a company cut back hours of an individual right now, but they paid them more than $247, they would not be entitled to $1 of state unemployment insurance benefits, nor would they be entitled to that $600 plus up. As as the weekly benefit goes down, the amount that a company can pay an individual and do some sort of part-time work, reduced hours work, that also, the effectiveness of the likelihood of that goes down as well.
Okay. And then one other note, not to say anything bad, but the unemployment rate went to 9.7. But the other number that is somewhat worrying to me is the labor force actually has fallen by almost 100,000 people in the last 6 months or so. And that means people who might be on, so we've had a reduction in the labor force itself, which helps make the unemployment rate look better, but it also reduces the number of people out there working.
Dr. Richardson, I think that's that smoldering issue that I think about a whole lot. The people that are just not connected. The labor force participation rate in this country is, of course, declining and has been for 20 years. But Louisiana is generally 2 to 3% behind the nation as a whole. So how do we engage those individuals in the labor force at all? How do we get them to create opportunities so that someone feels it's even worth their while to even attempt to look for a job or training or work? Creating those pipelines, those opportunities in impoverished communities. It's about equity and access and those things, and that we must address those issues because it is particularly true in our younger populations and our younger minority populations, but also women as well, which of course I believe is tied to the pay equity issue. But we know that we have in Louisiana, women their educational attainment is higher than that of their male counterparts, but it's counterintuitive then that labor force participation would be less.
Okay.
Any other questions? I would like to note that there's some public questions coming in, if you'd be willing to answer some of those. The first question is, what are the demographic breakdowns, if you have them by sex or race and ethnicity, for these employment statistics, or by region? Do you have any of those information, or does anybody on the call?
Oh, I got disconnected for a minute. Our information is not provided by race. It's only the Bureau of Labor Statistics that does the national information by race. But if anyone going to our website can get the links to what it is and the various just geographic or gender ethnic breakdowns. But some of that is not contained in state information. It is just the national numbers.
Great, thank you. The next question is there a PPP cliff coming up?
I would defer to Secretary Pearson to speak to PPP. It's not the subject matter or perhaps Secretary Robinson, I'm not sure who's the best person, but and saying grace over unemployment insurance and workforce, PPP is not the subject matter that I feel as comfortable with addressing.
Yeah, you've got a cliff coming, but the cliff that's coming is associated with the end of the federal supplement to unemployment compensation and the $600 a week currently being provided in Washington, D.C., which will end, as previously touched on in the call, on 31 July. And that's going to be a pretty dramatic shift in funds available to those that are currently unemployed.
Hey, Don or Terry or Kimberly, this is Tyron. We had our federal team had an extensive briefing last night by Senator McConnell's office on what the CARES 2 package is going to look like coming out of the Senate. And if it's appropriate, at some point this morning before we get off the call, I can give the commission members kind of a summary, because I do think it impacts a lot of the things that we're talking about.
Would love to have that, and we can, if it's suitable for posting, we could post it.
I can't post it yet, but I can hit you. I can, whenever it's appropriate during the course of this meeting, if you want to hear, I can talk about individual topics, because I think it'll be very relevant to some of the things that we're discussing.
Tyron, from an LWC standpoint, that would be great. I have to tell you, we are terrified at the prospect of what we're hearing is what the Senate's leaning on to, the tie to weekly unemployment benefits being tied to your last year's income and taxes. That is just something that every state workforce agency it would effectively mean that there would be no money going out of the doors to folks, because we just would not be able to manage that.
Well, is it appropriate to spend 5 minutes talking about that now?
Go ahead, Mr. Picard. Let's do that.
Yeah. So essentially the broad topics that will be covered is a liability protection provision, which will include medical liability protection and general business liability, additional individual assistance with the potential for individual direct payments of $1,200 per person and $5,000 per family. Of significance, it would be an extension of unemployment benefits through January of 2021. It would be likely at a level below the current $600 per week. But in addition to that, they are also contemplating something called a return to work bonus, which would encourage individuals to resume available jobs and provide essentially a bonus for that. A provision for additional assistance to state and local governments, which is not expected to be as much as the House version, the HEROES Act proposed, which was $1 trillion. Some additional technical changes to the PPP and eligibility expansions. Of significance is there's one proposal gaining bipartisan traction as an effort to aid the restaurant industry through the PPP program. So I thought that was significant. The additional support for testing for the virus for hospital patients treating coronavirus. And a priority is going to be placed on schools opening and aid to local school districts to be able to safely do that. So again, this is going to be essentially the Senate's rebuttal to the HEROES Act, which the House passed on party lines. So I don't expect that this will be the final version, but once it gets passed, we expect all this to come out publicly probably Wednesday or Thursday of next week. But we expect that negotiations will be fairly fast and furious, as they're going to try to do something before August 1st. So there's some. I just raise it because I think some of those things could be significant and certainly impact some of the things that we're talking about.
Very much. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah, Don, when I'm able to sort of release that in a printed version, I'll send it over to you and Kimberly and Terry.
Yeah, it understood.
Are there any other questions based on that or based on what Secretary Dejoie presented? Hearing none, I have one more. I have another question that's come up from the public, which is a question regarding Wi-Fi access to low-income housing areas that currently do not have it. Could we possibly arm school buses with hotspots and go into these neighborhoods and provide Wi-Fi access to these households so the training we're providing to teachers will correlate to the student access?
We've got a lot of ground to cover. I'll message back to that person in the chat to get in touch with Leslie Durham, and she's the governor's representative for broadband. And Sonia may also want to send her a link for additional information. But we really need to kind of continue to move our agenda forward here, please.
Yep. Okay. Next up on the agenda, we have T. Martin and Stan Harris. However, I want to ask if either of you, I'm getting a note from Dr. Levist that he has to leave the phone call soon. Would it be all right with you all if I moved Dr. Sandra Brown and Thomas Levist up the list since they have to get off in a minute?
Go ahead.
Sure.
Great, thank you. So this is from the Health Equity Task Force. Would you all like to make an update?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the great work that the Resilience Commission is doing and for inviting us here today. And thank you, Secretary Pearson and Ms. Terry Sterling, for your leadership. We are also very thankful to Governor John Bel Edwards for initiating the Louisiana COVID-19 Health Equity Task Force as part of a comprehensive response to the COVID pandemic. The governor heard our voices and he took action. The task force, just to tell you a little bit about the structure, it's comprised of a large group of diverse experts from a variety of relevant sectors of the state. Our structure consists of an 18-member executive committee and 48 subcommittee members who serve on one of the 9 subcommittee priority areas. The 9 areas include testing for vulnerable and at-risk communities, communication and messaging, data and analytics, special populations as it relates to COVID-19 in Louisiana prisons, and nursing home residents. We also have a policy and regulatory affairs subcommittee, community outreach and stakeholder engagement, racial disparities in healthcare.
How did it go?
Well, I felt that it went well. It was very engaging. I mean, it was almost like a conversation.
Good, that's the way it should be.
Yeah, it was a conversation. Nobody was, Mario probably was the one that asked me, he asked me a couple of questions. He asked me one. Patty's just such a sweetheart,
Donald might be able to mute her.
With issues, and she brought up the situation that I just told you. Her with one of the state reps that wanted a POTS line, and that's like forbidden in San Antonio. No POTS.
Got it. Sorry about that.
So those are the 9 subcommittees that comprise the priorities that we are addressing with the task force. A series of actionable reports, recommendations from each of these subcommittees has been generated and has been submitted to the governor. We are awaiting feedback regarding our next steps once he's had an opportunity, to really read over those recommendations. The 9 reports are also available on our task force website, which can be accessed through Southern University system website. Our goal as a task force is to assure that the state emerges from this pandemic in a stronger position, focused on health equity and improved health outcomes for all of its citizens. We are very thankful to the governor's COVID-19 Response Fund, which is funded through Pennington Family Foundation, the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, and the Huey and Angelina Wilson Foundation. We are thankful to these donors whose generous contributions are supporting the work of the task force. It is an honor to serve as the co-chair of the task force alongside my colleague, Dr. Thomas Levis, the Dean of Tulane University's Public Health and Tropical Medicine. We met for the first time this week, although we have been meeting for the past 3 months, 3 times a week. So we finally got to meet in person this week. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Levis for additional comments.
Yes, good morning, and thank you again for this invitation. As is usually the case, my co-chair, Dr. Brown, has covered everything thoroughly and left me with virtually nothing to say, except to thank you for the collaboration between this commission and our task force. I think it's important that we coordinate because of the important work that both groups are doing. I know that we can count on continuing the collaboration as we go forward with our work. As Dr. Brown indicated, we have submitted 9 reports this week to the governor. What we're doing now is having each task force look at their agenda, creating an agenda for a second wave of reports that we'll be providing to the governor at some point in the future. We're also coordinating with other states that have created similar task forces to this one to learn more about what they're doing in their states and how we might learn from their experiences. So thank you again for inviting us and the continued collaboration between this commission and our task force.
Thank you, Dr. Brown and Dr. Levis. Any questions for them from commissioners? Okay, thank you for all of your work that you've been doing. This is so important, and for the update today. At this point, I'd like to turn back to Stan Harris and T. Martin as well, if there's an update from the Louisiana Restaurant Association.
Go ahead, Stan.
Thanks, Andrew. And we appreciate, on behalf of my other co-leaders of the Restaurant and Entertainment Task Force, the chance to speak to you today. I'm going to focus on restaurants and bar operations at present. I'd like to thank the governor and his team and our co-chair, Secretary Pearson and Ms. Sterling, and Secretary Robinson from their outreach last week as outcomes with COVID required additional mitigation steps. Also appreciated joining the governor for his Ask the Governor radio program this week. As these additional mitigation steps were implemented, we appreciate the willingness to consider innovation and flexibility within the statutes that guide how beverage alcohol is sold and regulated in Louisiana. Unfortunately, the statutes don't allow us all the flexibility we'd like so that we could distinguish how to approach an emergency of this magnitude, but we added flexibility where possible. Also, providing for the conditional restaurant permittees to continue to operate was a good outcome and much appreciated by these operators. As the governor on Saturday issued a mask order and required bars to close, we expanded our support of this with messaging through social media and direct approaches with the industry statewide. Common sense tells us that masks, hand washing, social distancing, and enhanced hygiene and cleaning are simple tools that can help limit the spread of COVID-19. Last week, in partnership with the Office of Tourism, Lieutenant Governor Nungesser, and Louisiana Seafood, we launched a multimedia promotion to drive visits to our restaurants and feature Louisiana's great seafood. This includes television spots statewide, digital billboards, a large radio buy, and significant social media. And we want to thank the Lieutenant Governor for his commitment and this investment to our industry and this partnership. We continue to work with mayors, elected officials, the Department of Health, ATC, and the State Fire Marshal to build compliance with best practices to combat the spread of COVID-19. We've received good feedback on the courtesy compliance visits and their positive impact on compliance. This week, through our partnership with the National Restaurant Association and the Independent Restaurant Coalition, we launched an active campaign titled Blueprint for Restaurant Revival with our colleagues in Washington, focusing on our congressional delegations. Similar to what Tyron just mentioned, the central approach is an act called the Restaurants Act by Senator Wicker and Senator Sinema that would extend $120 billion in restaurant recovery funds. It's a U.S. Senate bill, and the campaign includes a number of tax and financial measures that could help sustain the industry as the crisis continues. It includes the PPP second round that Tyron mentioned, proposes PPP loans would be tax deductible, expands the employee retention tax credit, improves the economic injury disaster loans with replenished funding, just to name a few of the things that are included. Much as he indicated to us, we've had open conversations with Leader McConnell and their team talking about another round of PPP or this recovery fund, and they are very open to including some form of extending the federal subsidy for unemployment. Closer to home, a bit of good news. Many of our restaurants are continuing to partner with contractors and mass feeders to provide school feeding under the summer meal program. We expect some of this will continue as the fall school year begins and congregating students in cafeterias may not be possible. Another bright note, we want to recognize the Chefs Brigade in New Orleans for partnering with 44 restaurants and the New Orleans Culinary and Hospitality Institute, NOCI, the city and FEMA to execute an innovative approach to provide meals for the homebound. This novel approach illustrates the resilience and innovation of our restaurants and those government partners who are seeking new ways to serve these in-need communities. A similar program with Revolution Foods is underway in Jefferson Parish, using restaurants, private business, and government to find solutions for these needs. These programs keep the restaurant team members working, provide some revenue stream to the restaurants, but mostly connect all parts of our community. And we look forward to continuing to support these efforts. Lastly, through our partnership with the LRA's Education Foundation and the National Restaurant Association Educational Foundation, and with the Louisiana Workforce Commission, Louisiana will receive multi-year funding from the U.S. Department of Labor to execute youth apprenticeship readiness grants to increase youth participation in apprenticeships and provide a pathway for them to find a rewarding career. We appreciate Secretary Ava Dajwa's commitment to this partnership and to finding jobs and careers for our state's youth. We still have a great deal of uncertainty in our industry. We appreciate the measured approach and open communication with the governor's team as we write the guidebook to restore our industry and build a more resilient Louisiana. Thank you for allowing us to provide an update to the commission today.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Any questions? T, was there anything you'd like to add or ask about?
Just quickly want to thank Stan for the wine background because I need a drink right now. And more seriously for the report, that the measures that he's working on cannot come soon enough. That the wave of restaurant closures that you're going to see without some flexibility on PPP and some other help are going to be shocking, you know, from K-Paul's on down the list. So yes, there's a PPP and many other cliffs, and our industry is in devastation. So I can't thank all of you enough for those efforts, and particularly you, Stan.
We're happy to do it. It's what we're here for, and hopefully collaborating on all of these different approaches to feeding those at-risk communities, those in-need folks, and also providing some lifeline for the restaurants to operate. It's certainly something that's front of mind all day, every day. Thank you.
I'd like to turn now to Dr. Alex Bu. Are you on the phone, Dr. Bu? I didn't see you earlier. I just wanted to check.
Yes, sir. Hi, Alex is here.
Great, wonderful. Thank you. Would you like to give us an update from LDH?
Sure, yes. Good morning, everybody. I think this update almost comes a little bit after all the punchlines, but as you're all aware, the reason that we're having the continued discussions in this commission and in other areas is we still very much have a COVID epidemic statewide. And in fact, of late, the last several weeks, COVID cases have been rising throughout the state. And as we've emphasized, the current picture is really of a statewide epidemic. In the early days in March, what we saw was an outbreak that was centered largely around the greater New Orleans area and then spread out slowly across the state, though maybe it didn't feel very slow at the time, to major metropolitan areas and then rural communities. However, with putting in place the stay-at-home order, our state was able to turn around and start seeing reduction in cases really 14 days after that stay-at-home order went in place, peaking in early April, around April 13th or 14th, and then had one of the most precipitous declines in COVID cases seen in the country, which was good because we had one of the most precipitous rises in cases as well prior to that in the world. We continue to see improvement and reached a nadir really in late May, early June, in cases around the time that we began working with all of you and your helpful guidance from your various sectors to reopen and re-engage Louisiana's economy. Doing so in collaboration with the work that we were doing in the department to continue to expand access to testing. The point of the wedge for us in identifying who needs more help with isolation, as well as with contact tracing to identify those individuals who might have been exposed to those individuals who are found to be positive through testing and need to quarantine or take themselves out of general public in order for us to reduce the risk of continued spread. Using those measures and with careful guidance, we moved from phase 1 opening in May 15th to phase 2 at the beginning of June. Roughly around that time also would note that we saw a lot of increased public activity right around Memorial Day. As a result, as we've been tracking across phase 2 through the month of June, despite the fact that we have continued month on month and week on week to increase the volume of testing going on in communities, began to see a rise in cases not explainable purely by testing, as evidenced by a rising percent positivity. We now find ourselves in mid-July with every region of the state having a percent positivity greater than 10, including the greater New Orleans area, which for quite some time had been maintaining its percent positivity below 10%. And as a state, now exceeding 17%, almost at 18% positivity. Again, despite the fact that we also just passed our benchmark of over 1 million tests reported to the state. We remain one of the top states in per capita testing. And so all that's very concerning. And ultimately that, along with a lot of other evidence through contact tracing specific to sectors that were associated with a large number of outbreaks, and emerging and growing robust evidence around the importance of masking led Governor Edwards over the weekend to take the decision to remain in phase 2 as we had been, but begin to put in new restrictions in order to reduce the rate of spread and the pace of spread of COVID in our communities in order to avoid having to revert to a stay-at-home order. Those changes, again, I think everybody's familiar with, but included mandatory masking, reducing public gatherings, social gatherings to 50 persons or less, and the closure of all bars. It's noteworthy that shortly thereafter, the White House released guidance for high incidence counties and parishes across the country, of which by their calculation, we have 44. By our calculation, we have 61. The recommendations included mandatory masking for those parishes, reduction of gathering sizes to 10 persons or less, closure of bars and gyms, and actually, I think that was the majority of their. Oh, and mandatory masking if I didn't already say it. The important point there being that what was driving the White House's guidance, and was driving the guidance that we were giving to the governor that he ultimately acted upon in his proclamation, was emerging evidence that taking those steps, mandating masking, closing bars, which have a terrible economic impact, but an even worse impact on the outbreak if they remain open, and reducing gathering sizes, have been shown in national models to allow us to do things like remain in operation with restaurants. That was actually the other change. The White House recommended reducing restaurants back to 25%. But that would allow us to leave restaurants open. That would allow us to leave retail and industrial sites open without having to revert to a stay-at-home. And so we are hopeful that as we have put those measures in place as of Monday, that in the coming week or two, and probably it'll be 2 weeks from now, we'll begin to see both a plateau in cases and eventually a reduction in cases that resumes. As we see you all and members of the public really speak about the importance of these measures and the importance of adherence to these measures. And I'll close out with just the same data that I shared yesterday in the press briefing, really emphasizing the importance of masking, which sadly, not just in Louisiana, but across the country, has taken on some sort of weird social and political you know, feud, when it is really just a simple public health measure that has nothing to do with who you are, where you are, or what you do. The CDC released a study on Tuesday of this week of an outbreak, or rather of 2 individual hairstylists in Missouri who both contracted COVID around the same time in the same, working in the same store in Missouri. Missouri's regulations required that as a part of them continuing to be in business, they were wearing masks. The people who were working around them were wearing masks, and anybody who was sitting in their chairs to have their hair cut were all wearing masks. And across the 8 days between their onset of symptoms and when they finally had their test results that informed them they needed to go home and isolate, they came into contact with over 136 close contacts for greater than 15 minutes. Those close contacts were all assiduously followed, and not a single one of them went on to contract COVID-19. And thus, you've seen now the CDC and the White House quite clearly state there is nothing more important that we could be doing right now than mandating masking. The CDC has even said, if everyone in the United States would wear a mask for the next month, we would probably be done. So I really cannot overemphasize how important it is that we take the politics out of this and just do what we need to do to be able to keep Louisiana resilient and allow us to operate our businesses by making them as safe as possible through masking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Bu?
Thank you, Alex. I just want to acknowledge to the RLC Commission, I had the opportunity to join Dr. Bu and Dr. Phillips for their visit with Dr. Burks and the team, and just thanks for your outstanding leadership and your science-based response to this pandemic. The commission would have been proud of the great presentation and just the level of gymnastics and that the team has gone through to try to protect our citizens. So thank you, Alex.
To both Dr. Bu and to Dr. Phillips that was not able to join us this morning, their leadership has been extremely important as we're continuing to combat this crisis. And I don't really have this as a question, but I think that the RLC members here, if there's a time that they wish to comment on this, but this issue about mask or don't mask is so critical to trying to save lives and end the pandemic. And so there may be an ask of the RLC here before today's meeting concludes to comment or make a statement that we can join some other organizations that have come forward to emphasize how critically important it is that we implement strong public discipline around wearing a mask. So with that, I'll just, Kim or others, Kimberly Robinson, Secretary Robinson may wish to comment, but I invite that discussion. We're going to save it toward the end of the meeting, but maybe it's now more appropriate while we still have Dr. Bu with us.
John, this is Jay Darden. Just want to echo what you're saying and encourage everybody to consider joining in the public plea with people to wear masks and also to get tested. Let me just add, we've been talking to the National Guard, and we're going to have a mobile testing site for those of you in Baton Rouge, in downtown Baton Rouge, a site to be determined for a couple of days next week to encourage people to get tested, be they symptomatic or asymptomatic. But I just want to echo what you're saying regarding mask wearing and the importance of that. And for all of us who are talking about returning to some semblance of normalcy, having school open, having football, and enjoying sports in the fall, wearing a mask is going to help make that happen. Not wearing a mask is going to potentially prevent those kind of things from taking place. So I just want to join in that chorus and encourage the commission to also do likewise.
And Don, our Secretary Pearson, this is Kimberly Robinson, just to to follow up on Dr. Bu's discussion and the resolution that the task force already adopted, perhaps to add to that task force something on the governor's proclamation that was updated over the weekend to include the mandatory masking language, because the proclamation that was adopted talks about the RLC supporting the governor in taking the steps to keep us in phase 2 and supporting whatever was necessary with the state fire marshals conducting visits to keep businesses in compliance. So a further statement on the mandatory masking and whatever is necessary to further flatten the curve, and maybe some of the statistics that Alex just cited, with the overall positivity rate in the state that's currently exceeding 17%, to add that to the existing proclamation and get that issued with the mandatory masking language with the RLC in support of that.
So if the commission, I would ask that maybe Secretary Robinson's dialogue there would become a motion, that there would be some language drafted, and we will amend the resolution that was directed at our last meeting. That resolution was indeed drafted and put into form by Walt Leger. We have moved it over to the governor's communications staff and the governor's staff. As you can appreciate, we've had the FEMA administrator in on Monday, the vice president in on Tuesday. It's been a very busy time frame for state government. But so the resolution has not yet been pushed out over communications channels. However, I think this is now a point where we could amend and add that language relative to masking being critical, and the mandatory nature of public masking should be adhered to.
Yeah, I'll make that motion, Don. Or I'll second Walt's motion since he made the original motion at the last meeting.
I was going to be happy to second or make a motion, and it was, and I wanted to thank T. Martin for her leadership on getting us started on that, and then getting it kind of into its final form. I just wanted to make, for clarity's sake, make clear that from what I just heard from Dr. Bu, was that that wearing the mask is the most important step that we can all individually take in order to promote maintaining our status and moving forward. I think that's what he said, that it was the most important individual thing that we can do. Is that accurate? Is that what I heard?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, I think obviously this is a no-brainer for us to be fully embracing and supportive of these efforts. And yeah, my motion would be that we include it in what has already been prepared, and formalize that by just specifically stating that that compliance with the requirement that that people wear masks wherever they go be an essential component to our strategy to mitigate the spread and to ensure the economic vitality of our state.
So the chair will recognize this motion that is made by Walt Leger and seconded by Jay Brown Russell. Now for additional discussion. All right, I think people had sufficient time to get off of mute if that was their desire. I think you have the support. Let's call then for the vote. All in favor. If you'll raise your hand and we can see you, then you can say aye that way.
Aye.
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 Any nays? I'm intentionally pausing here just in case someone needed to get off mute. Hearing none, then we're going to consider this unanimously adopted. and we'll just proceed. When Walt gets a minute, we'll exchange the resolution in its current form and get those amendments put into it, and then pass it back over for issuance by the governor's communication staff.
Hey, Don, could we get a copy of that case study that Dr. BU referenced of the people in the hair salon that even if it came from him, that would be extremely helpful, because even some of the more educated people who are contrarian on the mask issues continue to say, well, what proof is there that a mask really does help? You know, so I'd love to get that personally and distribute it.
Don, to Tyrant's point, this is Sonia. And sorry, I had to step away from the call for a few minutes, so apologies if somebody's already referred to this. In today's New York Times, there is an article with a map that shows areas of the entire country, and you can see areas where people are wearing masks and people are not. And I was shocked at the low percentage of people that are shown to be wearing a mask in Louisiana. So if we could utilize that information for the cause, you might want to take a look at it, but it does refer to the hair salon example in the article. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll recognize Dr. Bio. I think you had a comment, sir, and may be able to forward that document to us. If you do that, then we can distribute to the commission members.
Yeah, that was all I was going to say. Is I'm happy to send that. It's a CDC publication, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Review.
Oh, I have a question, Dr. Beerley. I think if I heard you correctly, you said if we all wore masks for a month, we would be over this issue. Does that mean we keep out people from Arizona and Georgia and Texas and Florida from coming to the state, or what?
Well, so I think the point the CDC was making there was, this was based on not just the findings of this particular, case study of 2 hairstylists, but we even see in our own data that once we saw levels of masking increase, we saw a more dramatic decrease in the reproductive rate, the rate of new people getting infected, than we would have predicted. You remember, or you might remember in some of our early press conferences, we talked about how we thought if we did stay at home, we could reduce the spread or the number of new infections that any one infected person creates down to 1.3. What we found instead was that we were actually getting much lower than 1, which is what you need to do to stop an epidemic. And now there's emerging evidence that masking is a key component of what's been able to get us below 1, to where a person who's infected is not even necessarily infecting somebody else. And so based on that, the CDC made a statement, essentially, a little bit hyperbolic, but I think accurate, that if truly everyone were to wear a mask and probably try to, stay more than 6 feet away, we would end transmission. And that's why if you can end transmission long enough for people to get through their current illness, there's nobody next to you to get ill. That would be huge. So if we can wear masks wherever it is that we're going, it makes your place of business, your restaurant, all those things safer. Restaurants are tough, bars are tough because people have to take masks off, obviously, to eat and drink. But if most of the time we're wearing masks, it'll have a significant impact.
Okay, thank you now.
Jim, according to this map in the New York Times today, there's a lot more people wearing masks in the states that you named than are in Louisiana. It really is shocking.
Okay.
I'm going to send this to Andrew so that he may be able to forward it to the rest of the commission.
Yeah, I'll note Texas was deep purple in lots of places, showing good masking.
And Dr. Bio, Allie's already sent us the link, so you don't have an action item. We'll get that out to the commission.
And I've just posted it in the chat. Any other questions for Dr. B? Okay, thank you so much, Dr. B. We know how important your work is, and we appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Now, thank you all for your leadership and sharing these messages.
Thank you,
We'll continue
Alex.
to push on that, Dr. Bu.
The next item on the agenda is an overview of document production in Appendix 1. Secretary Pearson, would you like to take that?
I'll lead off, and in just a few minutes, we'll ask James Chappell to sort of give you an update on our status. Certainly, there has been a enormous amount of work and attention by a team that's going over the more than 500 pages of reports that the 15 task force submitted. Captured that. We're then going through the briefings that each task force conducted for the full commission. And there's several challenges to all of this. We will be providing to you all of those reports, although they're all posted individually at the website. The document that we'll call Appendix 1 that we want to preserve for everyone to use in the coming months and years, as we aggregated all those different formats, and some people using Word and some people using Google, and et cetera, et cetera. There's just some issues, but all that information is still available to both the public and the commissioners, but we are going to aggregate it in one spot, and we'll get that posted and notice you that it is posted very soon. There's an important element to this, is that that will be a working draft. We know from our first document that we produced back in mid-May that sometimes task force people, leaders want to come back and they see something that was left out, or maybe the context isn't just quite right. So when we post Appendix 1 here shortly, it'll be a call to action for task force leaders to review their document in final form as the working draft. And then later we'll ask the commission to adopt that Appendix 1, which will be the compilation of all those task force leader reports. Now, the next part of this is to put together our second document. And it's not a final document. There may be more documents that come in the future. We'll wait and see on that. But this will be a very important roadmap to making Louisiana more resilient. So part of our challenge, and James will touch on this, is to sift through so much important, great technical work that was submitted by the task force, and try to integrate that with the emerging themes that are the way we're organizing the document. We didn't want to come back to the commission with a 100-page document. We're trying to put this into a form that is both manageable and yet serves as the basis for actionable items to be generated as we move forward. The whole purpose of developing this very significant amount of intellectual property, which is basically what it is now, is to make it then actionable. And so we'll speak a little bit more about next steps, but at this point, I want to let Terry say anything else she wants to add as intro, and then move over to James. I know we're going long here today, but this is one of the most important elements to walk you through where we are in terms of the framework that's been designed. Terry?
I'll yield my time to James.
All right, James. And then also, I think maybe Donald is going to help with some postings. So for your Zoom participants, you can now see a screen, Resilient Louisiana Commission. James, over to you.
Thanks, Secretary Pearson. So yeah, can everybody see the slides on the screen?
I do.
So yeah, just to follow up, really kind of quick, brief overview of where we are. My team at LED, we've been working a lot on trying to take, as Secretary Pearson mentioned, the 530 something pages of all the task force reports and really digest that down into a high level. It's not supposed to capture everything, but we wanted to make it very easy for the reader to at least kind of pique their interest on things, give them major categories, why they're important, and then at least a few of the items, the action items it would take to try and achieve those initiatives that were put forth by the task force. So the commission summary or report, as I mentioned, it's designed to be a high level, what are the big areas and initiatives. It's divided into the short term or near term, which would, as we know, we defined as kind of within the COVID, before a vaccine or any treatment, and then the longer recommendations. And it's getting close to finish. We're kind of doing the final polishes, adding a few things feedback wise, and it's about 25 pages right now. Obviously, you know about the appendix. You all worked on it. As I mentioned, that's 500 plus pages. And the thought is you kind of learn the high level things with the commission report summary, and then you go to the appendix, to the specific task force reports to learn more. As I mentioned, we have that commission report similar to the way the task force reports were done. We divided it into the short-term recommendations within the COVID while it's still present, and then the longer-term ideas, initiatives on how to get to a more inclusive, resilient Louisiana. So that's the structure that we went with. And so just to give a really quick high level on those kind of big categories, big themes, big areas that we've identified going through the reports. And so for the short term, the near term, kind of the within the COVID, there was a lot of very specific sector-oriented, sector-specific ideas. But even outside of that, there were really kind of 9 major categories that jumped out. None of them are a big surprise. Health and safety was obviously one that kind of ran throughout the reports. Education and childcare, how to get that open in a smart and safe way. Legal liability for businesses. Small business support in the short term, things like access to PPP-like loans or introduction to customers, mentorship, anything to try to guide small businesses through this time of the pandemic. Regulatory things to make that smoother, less in-person visits, things like that. Taxes and economic stimulus, and that's we see in the near term and long term. This was more on any kind of quick investments or short term taxes, once again, to try and help businesses get through this rocky time. Support for maybe congressional delegation, looking at some of the federal funding and programs, how to change those, alter those, maybe open some things up a little broader. Opportunity zones was one, looking at potentially some changes to the PPP program, things like that. And then finally, infrastructure and investments from a public health infrastructure and then other state transportation, kind of quick, almost stimulus infrastructure investments. To try to stimulate the economy. So those were the big kind of short-term categories that we identified that kind of ran throughout a lot of the task force reports. And then when we looked at the longer term, we really had kind of 6 major areas that we saw that jumped out that the task forces thought we should focus on that would lead to a more resilient Louisiana in the future. Economic inclusion, quality of life, and health outcomes was a big one that most task forces touched on in some way. Educational outcomes is another one. Workforce and continuing education, small business and entrepreneurship, state government support, and increased connectivity, both broadband and transportation. And so the one thing, obviously, and we have these visually overlapping, because obviously a lot of them do. You can't really have economic inclusion. Obviously, that goes hand in hand with educational outcomes. So there's a lot of overlap, but we tried to kind of put them in the categories where they best fit. But a lot of them probably could have gone in multiple categories if we chose to move them there. So really high level, kind of quick look at each of those big categories. Just some of the initiatives around it and why it matters. Increased economic inclusion and equity. This was pulled from the very good report that we had a few weeks ago, that equity is the new growth model. And to achieve that, You have to erase social and geographic disparities in opportunities and outcomes. And the equity is not just a matter of social justice or morality, but it's an economic necessity. And that obviously, when you start to think about it, which I have more since a lot of these discussions, it just makes a lot of sense. If you have everybody kind of contributing and with opportunities, you obviously can grow that pie much, much bigger. Community investment and development. Citizens in these communities that are kind of left behind without these opportunities are not going to contribute and not have the opportunity to contribute as much. So investing in these communities will create more opportunities and lead to better outcomes. Public health infrastructure investments is obviously a really important one. And it matters because, for obvious reasons, quality and accessible healthcare is necessary for citizens and leads to better outcomes and more productive citizens. Once again, more opportunity to be included and participate in the economy. Improvement in health and well-being, that goes hand in hand with the public infrastructure investment. Health and well-being is vital for strong, resilient economies, and healthy individuals can better contribute to the overall productivity of the state. And you see that time and time again of how closely those two go in hand with health and the productivity and kind of the state of a state. Next, educational outcomes. There were really three kind of main areas around that. Increased access to early childcare. There's study after study that show that young children who get in early and have access to high quality early care are more likely to grow into citizens who positively contribute to the communities. And also that access to the quality childcare is really important for the parents. So they can go to work and not have to worry about childcare. Improvement of K through 12 programs was another one that was mentioned in a lot of places or a few places. And it goes without saying that that's just a strong program and it's the backbone for getting students ready for the workplace, going into higher education. And there's also some of the task force reports showed the high correlation between a high school graduate not only has better career opportunities, but they're much, much less likely to live in poverty than those who stop short of a high school education or graduation. And then improve higher education outcomes. We know at LED and a lot of others mentioned the task force reports that higher education is such an important factor for a state's ability to compete in the global marketplace for workforce, and so for a lot of other things, and it's such a critical part of our economic strength and social well-being. Similar kind of continuing on that, workforce development and continuing education. One of the things we saw was better collaboration between a lot of the state and local agencies who all have a focus on workforce. LED, obviously LWC and a lot of others. And so the more they can work together, the more it'll help elucidate partnership opportunities and reduce redundant efforts while strengthening outcomes and ultimately lead more job opportunities for Louisiana. Create pathways. This is for underemployed and unemployed populations. This is obviously one that could easily fit in the economic inclusion and equity as well. Mentioned in the task force reports was 2015, nearly 50% of Louisiana working adults were disconnected from employment opportunities due to lack of skills and or education. And so, like I said before, obviously that's such an important piece because the economy and the state can't thrive and can't prosper having such a large amount of people disconnected from opportunities in the workforce. Another key piece was training centers and ongoing learning, making it really easy for people to access quality workforce training programs and to allow adults to improve their skills, to upskill, to reskill, but to make that pathway much more easy, especially when you think about working adults and people who may not be able to stop everything and just undertake or take on a new workforce program. One of the things that was mentioned earlier that came out and that we brought into the summary was access to available information and jobs. It's important that people know where to go. They can easily find jobs. They're connected. If postings are all over the place, if people don't have access and don't know where to look for jobs, that goes back to that labor force participation thing that was mentioned earlier. People will just become frustrated and drop out and kind of quit trying. Small business and entrepreneurship. This is obviously really important, and all states, Louisiana in particular, just such a large part of our economy relies on small business and entrepreneurship. I saw a study that a couple of days ago that Harvard estimates, Harvard researchers estimated 110,000 small businesses may have already closed their doors for good. And the longer this goes on, obviously, the harder it is for small businesses to navigate and make it through the other side. And if they don't, that's going to be a major hit to our economy the more that don't. So some of the things that came out from that: increased access to capital. It's a huge roadblock that a lot of entrepreneurs and small businesses face, especially as you move to the more disconnected, low-income minority entrepreneurs who don't necessarily have the network. So increased access to capital will help them grow, help new businesses, and also help prevent as many failures post COVID-19 as we can. Increase entrepreneurship opportunities, similar, but entrepreneurship is a really important way, and one a lot of people have shown to not only increase standards of living and not just create wealth for the owners of the company, but also the entire community that they're in. So trying to come up with more ways and make it easier and make it more navigable for people to start businesses and become entrepreneurships themselves across their state, not just in our more urban areas, but create those opportunities for everybody. Incentives and training. As I mentioned, obviously capital is often limited for small businesses. So well thought out incentives can help them survive through this or also grow in the future, similar to like an R&D program that we have now, but there may be some other ways and other incentives to look at to try and help small businesses grow. And also training and mentorship programs, just that connection to help people understand what's out there, what they could do differently, and how to best grow their businesses. And once again, not just to make sure that everyone across the state is aware of these things, and it's not just pockets in Baton Rouge and New Orleans and Shreveport and places like that, but to try to expand that reach and reach as many people in the state as we can. And then increase opportunities for small businesses, more access to customer networks, to any kind of state contracts and things like that to help create a customer base whenever feasible and possible. Connection, which there are already ongoing efforts, but to try and bolster connections between some of our bigger companies and small businesses who may be able to serve their needs. State government support. This is really kind of fiscal and regulatory. This is something that's talked about a lot, but fiscal reform, which has been looked at and talked about many times in Louisiana, but Louisiana has a pretty complex tax structure. So a simple, more broad tax structure with potentially lower rates will provide greater revenue, stability, and predictability, and is typically more fair for all groups of taxpayers. Business liability and risk management is one that came up in not only the short term, but also the long-term initiatives and strategies. And this is to limit businesses' liabilities, to give them confidence to reopen, and also know long-term that if another event like this happens, they're more prepared, and it's more kind of concrete on what they can and can't do and should and shouldn't do, and the liability and risk around all of those things. Tax incentives is one that came up a lot, and is obviously something we look at a lot at LED. It matters because tax incentives, if they're designed effectively, which is obviously very important, they can be used to attract and retain new businesses in the state, grow businesses in the state, It's just important that it's really done and to target, to make sure you're targeting the right industries and that you're actually getting growth that you probably wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Business development strategies and economic diversification is one that came up a good bit. We obviously, as a state, rely on several industries like oil and gas and tourism and others a lot. And so when we get hit with something like this or a downturn in oil and gas, it impacts us a lot. So the more we can diversify and continue to grow those foundational and traditional industries, but try to diversify as much as possible and bring in new types of businesses, it makes us a little less susceptible to future disruptions, and it also helps create a more diversified, inclusive, and resilient economy. And then finally, on the state government support, regulations and more planning for disruption, similar to the business liability, but just having more agreed upon plans and regulations in place that will help mitigate impacts and help businesses stay open, and plans for remote work and distance learning and things like that, to have those in place and ready. And then finally, increased connectivity, and that includes broadband and transportation. Access to broadband is probably one that came up in the most task force reports, or certainly in a lot of them. And it goes without saying to this group, obviously access, there's so many benefits. It keeps people connected. It makes it more of a community. It helps with access to jobs. It helps productivity. And the list goes on and on. Education, remote learning, all of those. Transportation infrastructure, similar in some ways, even though different. It helps connectivity. It helps with safety. It helps enhance productivity, and also helps with things like quality of life, and helps support economic growth and community growth and everything else. And then finally, invest in utilities infrastructure to make sure those are strong and can operate through all kinds of things, storms and everything else. So just robust utilities infrastructure, increased resiliency of communities, and also the quality of life in those communities. So that's it for really high level. And so it'll be a little more detail in the report, but once again, the summary report is designed to give a little more information than that, but really let somebody understand the bigger pictures and let them do a deeper dive in the much longer actual task force, the sector reports.
Thank you, James. I think that's an effective view for the commission as to our current status. Some commissioners may have some thoughts or comments, and let Terry say a few words, and then we will invite comments from the commissioners if there are some.
Thank you, Secretary Pearson, and thank you, James, for a job well done. I think the important question for the commissioners is, how do we want to go forward to validate that the major themes are, that there's consensus around those themes, and then the distillation of strategies and tactics as it relates to that. And then secondarily, as it relates to the appendix document, which is quite long, is consideration for when we send that document back to the task forces, to ask them to potentially illuminate and make sure that we have validated the quick wins, the big ideas, big innovation, and then if there are complex issues, much like the higher ed master plan, they're complex, but they're worth it. And so do we want to do that work as a commission? Do we want to do that work as a side work group? As we begin to get to a real report, how do the commissioners want to inform the report and validate what makes it to a more concise, potentially maybe 20 or 25 page document?
And those are some things that you don't have to immediately respond to today. But Terry and I are contemplating that in the shorter term, we're going to get this document to you as a working draft. As you just illuminated, we want your review to help us achieve that balance of blueprinting the items of importance without, and this is one of Terry's phrases she's taught me, is boiling the ocean, where you're trapped in so many elements and so much detail that you just can't really make good progress. And the next part of this, and there's been some discussion around it, is okay, we finish our second document, and we've got a great appendix, and we've got great thought, and it's all trapped inside a 500-page document. How do we get it out of there and move it forward? And so that's another thing that Terry and I want to have the commission contemplate. I want to inform you that the governor and the administration feel like this is an important commission that continues to accomplish amazing work, and that here we are. We were thinking about maybe we'd have a spike in the fall, but now we've got a spike in the middle of the summer. So we're not anywhere near being able to put up a mission accomplished sign. What's more important is I think that we continue to engage because there's just so much uncertainty that lies ahead. But to capture basically a summary of the good work that's been done, to I've identified areas of critical importance. And then another part that Terry's illuminating here is where there's good work, say something like Dr. Kim Hunter-Reid's forward-looking, how we move higher education forward. If there's some endorsements of the Health Equity Task Force, or the RESET program, whichever elements need to be on that menu is a work challenge for the commission, because we may be able to arrive at some endorsements of these programs, and then we don't have to go to those sectors and drill down. We can continue to maybe harvest other areas of import and have a working group that does this communication. There'll be elements that we want to communicate to the legislature. There'll be elements that we want to communicate to the congressional delegation for actions in Washington. There's still a lot of work to be done that lies ahead. Terry, what did I miss?
Nothing. Great job. Feedback from the commissioners?
Terry, it just strikes me that at some point, we're all going to have to trust the document that will be created. I am struggling, and it might come to me, I'm struggling to determine what process we could create that would be efficient to get feedback regarding, word for word, what we're going to release in any document. So for me, the issue is it's one of trust at the end, but I agree that we don't want to create a cumbersome document that's just going to sit on a shelf and nobody's ever going to refer to it because it's got so much information in it. I'll think on it some more, but for me, that's where my mind is right now.
I think Sonia makes a very good point, especially as it relates to the items which are going to require legislative action. If we show up with a 100-page plan, it's going to sit in a Pentagon apartment on a shelf somewhere. So making sure that it's it's a document that's workable and has enough of a, I guess, of a wow factor and attention getting factor so that it sort of expresses what the objective of the policy and the desired outcome is, so that they can sort of see the result of what taking action will mean.
And I certainly appreciate that perspective. And I think for all of us, the efficiency of it is what is the challenge. But for example, if we take the idea of what does need to go federally, is it worth having a group or a subgroup that only looks at those items? Because you have 500 pages of items. How do we gather those, prioritize those, and regardless really of where they sit in either report 1 or report 2, then how do we then move forward, and who champions those items is even the next step beyond that. And so how we get organized so that we best use the time and talents of this group and even our task force leaders and task force members to try to distill those things down into, like I said, that first 20-page report, and then the action items in the more detailed reports.
Well, Terry, if you're looking to prioritize sort of the, after this next round of funding federally on sort of the CARES 2, which should happen by the 1st of August, we do not expect there to be any more action from Congress before the election. So anything that is in our package of suggestions or recommendations related federally probably is candidly a 2021 action item.
Hey, Terry, this is Jade. I agree with everything everyone has said. I do think we have to call particular attention to those action items. And I think that if we break those down by local, state, and federal, we probably can, divide and conquer. Some of us, like Mr. Picard is much more in tune with things that are happening on the federal level and can, really provide some valuable input and guidance on federal action items that we might be proposing. I can think of some other members of the commission who are much more in tune on the state level, and then others who are much more in tune on the local level. So I think, the most important part of this is others who preceded me have said is that the action items that come out of the report. I think all of the background information probably will sit on someone's shelf, somewhere. But I think, those very focused, condensed action items are the things that we all can collectively carry as we move forward in the next year or 2 years or however long it takes us to emerge from all of this. But that would be my kind of 2 cents, is to, divide and conquer once we have those action items separated by local, state, and federal.
Other comments for the good of the group? All right, just sort of summarizing then, the team's hard at work. We will notice you and message when Appendix 1 is available, so that task force leaders can review the working draft Appendix 1 for any changes before it's officially adopted and becomes a public record. Then we're working on the overarching document, currently at about 25 pages, I think James said, and polishing is continuing on that, and that will be issued to you as a working draft. Some time to spend with it to feel like it captures and then edits and comments is what it's about. for consideration by the commission. And then we'll get to a point where we're adopting that and issuing that as a public record. And then we'll certainly continue with action groups, and we'll figure out who's got RLC fatigue and but who has passion and refuses to put it down. But we think that there's so much great work. There's a lot more tasks to be examined and achieved. And so we see a role at least through the end of the year or the end of the pandemic, whichever comes first or something. But we're dedicated to all of this. There's just a tremendous amount of work that has been gone into this so far and really continues. So it's impressive, and I'm very appreciative of all those that are making that heavy lift for us. Any other items to come before the commission today before we conclude?
Andrew, I'll just ask you to please send James's presentation to the commissioners, just to make sure they have an opportunity if there are any things that, specific comments they would have.
Great, happy to do that.
Thank you.
James, can you send that to me?
Sure, I'll send it right now.
Thank you.
Any other comments for the good of the group? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Great weekend.
Seconded. Thank you all. Bye.